And welcome back to the Cooler Jets podcast. Your host Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, we're joined by a very special guest, Jet X's own Joe Blewett. Joe, how you doing, man?
I've missed you guys. The weekly podcasts have not been coming out weekly.
I know.
So I've been waiting around for another podcast for you guys. And no, I'm excited. We're getting closer to training camp. We're about 2 weeks away and 60 days away from opening day. So
I think it's 24 days from the first game when this comes out. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, 10 days until they report till training camp. So it's been such a boring past few weeks. I cannot wait to have something to pay attention to.
I think Nani's going to run out of articles at this point. He's putting out 2 or 3 articles a day. I don't know what else he can write about at this point. So I know we're starving.
I'm very low on ideas. I'm going way deep into the bottom of the barrel.
What were some of the articles this week? I've been off the Twitter recently.
Well, I had a little run where I actually didn't for a few days, but I did the last couple on. I know it's shocking, but I did a couple on teams on the schedule who might be better or worse than expected, which I think is a cool idea. Okay. But you really got to get specific at this point to keep it going.
Joe Blewett's doing Randall Cobb film reviews.
Not even Randall Cobb. I'm getting to Wes Schweitzer and Tristan Cologne. Yadni Kajus is up there. Billy Turner. So we're even delving deeper than Randall Cobb at this point. We got 30.
That's what we do, though. That's
the point of Jet X.
Hit every single corner.
All right. Well, Joe, you are Jet X's resident film guy, and like you said, we've been a little inconsistent the last few weeks. We had a nice little run of interviews, and then I was on vacation. Mike was on vacation, but we're back now. We're like, who better to bring us back than Joe Blewett, who. How many hours of film do you think you've watched this year?
Thousands. I would say probably thousands.
Jesus.
Legitimately. I was going over how long each review takes me, and I would say I think it's anywhere from 10 to 20 hours. But even if you're saying 10 to 15, I've done 31 reviews, so 31 times 15 hours a pop. You're talking about thousands of hours of watching film at this point.
That's too much. You have a problem.
A little bit.
But definitely one of the best football minds out there on Jets Twitter, so make sure to follow him at JoeRB31. We have a bunch of different topics here, but we know each other pretty well, so we're not going to be as organized here. I guess the best place to start is with the new offense. Moving on from Michael Floor, bringing in Nathaniel Hackett. Before we get into any of the new players, Rodgers, Lazard, whatever, what are some of the biggest differences that Jets fans can expect between these two schemes?
So for me, when I watch, and obviously you have to watch a couple of different schemes because you got to watch Tennessee because that's our run and pass game coordinator. You have to watch a little bit of Hackett, and they're similar systems, so it's not like you're going to see any drastic differences. There's a few type concepts that you might see a little bit more with Hackett over what LaFleur did, and some philosophical things. For me, watching those offenses, the running backs got more involved. You see more fullback usage. You see more tight ends up the seam when you're watching Rodgers in that offense, which I think will benefit the Jets. I don't really like their tight end usage and their lack of tight end usage at times. So I think I see a little bit more involvement in that. Running backs in quick screens and getting guys the ball with space in their hands. Hackett's a big mesh guy. Thousands of different meshes you can run. That he's very big on, where the last system with LaFleur, he's very and they're both big on sail type concepts to the sideline, those 3-level reads. But you'll have little different things like mesh versus the Jets last year ran a lot of spin where you had the dig from the outside and the option route underneath, which is a high-low read over the middle. So you'll have a little bit of philosophical differences with concepts, but I would say more running back usage, more tight end up the seam usage, and I would say a little bit more screen action. And the thing I wanted to watch a little bit more of, and just in general, talking about how much I actually watch sometimes, it's so sometimes it kind of all blends together. But I want to see how much more they actually they don't involve motion a lot, but I want to see if when they do involve motion, if they ever build off of it, because something that LaFleur never did, building off the motion. And I know that Rodgers' offenses are pretty stagnant, but I also want to see if they incorporate any concepts off of that motion. That's something that LaFleur struggled with a little bit, but I'd say that's about it in terms of going through different concepts. We can go through 5, 10, 15 different concepts if I really wanted to sit down and mark them down. But I don't think we want to do that. I think people will probably log off at that point.
Yeah, who do you think benefits the most from this scheme change?
Everybody.
Yeah.
No, really, it's. I would say it's the tight ends, and I would say I think the ball's in the hands of the running backs a little bit earlier. But I'm really excited for guys like Conklin, and I don't think he's the best guy in terms of getting balls vertically and working up the seam, but In that offense, you see a tight end as a primary read a little bit more than you did with LaFleur. So I think guys like Conklin, Uzama, and Ruckert are going to be the benefactors of just this scheme. Now, if you're talking about just the quarterback, it's going to be everybody. Obviously, with Zach Wilson being one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, even at the point where like Zach Wilson was a bad backup last year. Like you can't even rely on him to be a backup this year. That's how bad he was last year. So everybody's going to benefit. But from the scheme specifically, and again, it's really, really hard to tell just because you have so many guys merging together that it's never going to be the same thing it was in prior years for any one of those guys individually. But I would guess the tight ends have the biggest jump in production in this offense.
And I know you watched a lot of Rodgers over the past few years, both under Hackett and the year after. I'm curious, and not to spoil the last couple parts of your Rodgers film review that haven't come out yet, but 2022 with Rodgers, it was a down year statistically. He got a lot of criticism. Packers missed the playoffs, so a lot of negatives. And he's coming over to the Jets, not on the highest note. So what are some of the things you saw from that 2022 season from Rodgers, and how fixable are some of the issues that caused him to struggle?
Yeah, it looks like, and like sometimes it's hard to quantify exactly what's wrong, but to me there was definitely instances where he would not throw a ball that he would have previously released, whether that be not trusting the offensive line and him not being able to step into the pocket, even if the pocket was there to step into. It looked like at times he didn't trust his offensive line, and maybe part of that's being injured, and you want to be a little bit more careful if you're throwing from a cloudy pocket with a broken hand. Your thumb hits that guy's helmet, it's going to suck. And like that, and even if that's not something that's necessarily on the front of your mind, it might be in the back of your mind, and it might hamper some decisions. But after the broken thumb, and he always, like, historically he struggled in the first couple of weeks, so he wasn't like elite in the first couple of weeks even before the thumb injury. But specifically after the thumb injury, I didn't see him lose his arm, but he lost his touch a little bit, and part of that could be the thumb, and part of that could be being on the same page with guys like Romeo Doubs, who's obviously a rookie, and Christian Watson, who are rookies. So it looked like the timing was off. He definitely started to be a little more hesitant on some balls. I would say that balls were definitely a little bit more inside, and they didn't have as much steam on them, but that's expected with a fractured thumb. And even if he could throw a ball, because there was instances where I saw him throw a ball 65, 70, no, maybe not 70 yards, but 65 yards. So he could still throw the ball, but touch is a huge part of the game. And when you have a fractured thumb, it's really hard to feel that touch, and literally inches make a difference. Like we all know this. I say millimeters, not inches. So if you don't have that precise touch, it can look a little bit off. So part of it was him. Part of it was the thumb injury. Like I said, it looked like he was hesitant at times, or he didn't trust his receivers to be in a certain spot. He's big on chemistry. He's big on receivers knowing what he's thinking, where he's putting balls for certain leverages, and it didn't look like he trusts his guys. And part of it was the fact that his team wasn't so talented as well. Like I go over the review, and people would see part 3 and 4 when they come out. Like even if guys just caught balls at a normal rate, I don't know what the exact drop rate was, and drop rates are hard to quantify, right? And like this is something that we talked about last stream, Nania, or Kyle and I talked about last stream. It's like, well, what's the difference between a wide open drop and a drop where it's a contested ball, like Corey Davis's ball against the Broncos a couple of years ago? Like, yeah, technically a drop, but a much different drop than a guy who's wide open. And you see literally the first pass of his season last year, what should have been an 80-yard touchdown to Christian Watson, he drops it. So his guys weren't helping him out. The offensive line wasn't great. Part of it was him, but I think if he just had a normal drop rate, he probably has 31, 32 touchdowns and less, and maybe a less pick or two. And then maybe we're looking at a little bit different. So yeah, it was a down year, but it wasn't something where I was watching like, oh my God, this guy has completely lost it.
What do you think about the relationship between Rodgers and the O-line? Like both ways, how that can work. How do you think Rodgers helps the offensive line? And also how dependent do you think he is on good offensive line play to be successful?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like volatile with him, because like there's some times where he gets through his reads so quickly where the offensive line only has to block for a second, but then there's times where you see with him, and it's, I forget exactly what I labeled it, but it's like almost like conservative aggressiveness with him, where like he'll have a shorter read open, but he has the confidence in himself to check the 2 or the 3 or go back to the 1 or whatever it is. Like, hey, the intermediate's open, but I'm going to check the deep again because I know I have some time for the intermediate, but I'm just going to see if that guy has some good leverage. I'm going to throw it to him, which might put some more pressure on the offensive line because he may hold the ball for an extra second or two looking to go deep. not necessarily putting the ball in harm's way, but he might take an extra second to release the ball just because of how confident he is in his arm, how confident he is in his read. So there are some times where he could really help the offensive line out. Like we saw multiple examples of him with Devontae Adams, and even in last year, times with Watson, where they like to do those 3-by-1 sets, and then you isolate Watson, and his 3 receiver side might be his primary read, but Rodgers pre-snap, because he's so smart, can see the defense, keep his eyes onto the isolated side, which typically you're not going to see quarterbacks do. Check that, go back to the 3 side if it's not open. But there's plenty of times where if that isolated side is open, right away, he'll throw a deep ball, back shoulder, whatever it may be. So there's some times where he could hurt them, and there's times where he could definitely help them. But in terms of like the offensive line and having to get used to him, I think it's more about checks at the line of scrimmage and being able to run that like quick huddle or quick like no huddle offense to take advantage of some defensive sets. So I think it's more about just having good communication pre-snap. Post-snap, I'm not really so concerned about it because he's not Lamar Jackson, right? Like it's not like you have to work at a new set point and expect him to be scrambling around and all that stuff. So I think more of the offensive line and what they have to get used to with Rodgers is the pre-snap communication and knowing exactly what he wants.
Yeah, what do you make of this Jets offensive line? Because you got a 40-year-old Dwayne Brown protecting Rodgers' blind side, a guy in Laken Tomlinson who really underwhelmed last year, a rookie center, AVT who's awesome, but we'll see how he is coming back from injury if he can stay healthy. And then I guess Mekhi Becton at right tackle, who seemingly doesn't want to play right tackle, hasn't really played football in 2 years. High ceiling, but very low floor. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, you pretty much said it right there. And I know Nania, one of his 1,000 articles, he did, the ceiling of it being like near the top 10, the floor being really bad. And that's what it is. Now, can you expect as many injuries as last year? I don't think that's feasible, but we are the Jets. So maybe we should. But like, are we going to get down to tackle 7 again this year?
Ready.
Probably not. But it's like at one instance, like, okay, it was so negative last year. Like if we just have a little bit more of a positive outlook, like Dwayne Brown was not good last year, but it's very hard to play tackle with a torn rotator cuff. Like, I don't know if you guys ever torn anything, but like it's very painful. So I can't imagine having to block Myles Garrett with a torn rotator cuff or whoever he blocked during the year. So I think he will take a step up. For Laken Tomlinson, it's hard to be as bad as he was, right? So like you're looking at 2 guys who I think no matter what are going to take steps in the right direction from those 2 guys. The center position, even if it's what it was last year, I think Connor McGovern gets a lot of like unwarranted hate. I don't think he's a bad player, but I think he's just okay. And we know how Jets fans are. It's black or white. You either suck or you're really good. And McGovern falls in the middle, so I'm comfortable with him. ABT, I'm comfortable with him as well too because it's a tricep thing, right? Like it's not a knee thing, it's not an ankle thing, it's nothing like that. Like you don't really see a lot of like knock on wood, but you don't really see a lot of like repeating tricep injuries. And ABT review is coming out relatively soon. Like he was so damn good last year at guard. It was so fun to watch him. So I'm really, really excited to see him come back and him just thrive at one position, right? Like a lot of people talk about ABT moving from right guard to left guard to tackle. Like, yeah, that's great that he has that that versatility, but if he could lock down to a spot, like that's undoubtedly going to help him in his progression in his career. And I think if you keep him in one spot next year, I don't think it's hyperbolic or hyperbole to say he could be
that's our favorite word on the podcast from last year.
There you go, a all pro guard. So and then past that, Becton is the biggest question mark. Like he is for not I don't mean to do this, but he's the biggest X factor of the year.
There we go.
Because
making the logo.
If he's as good as he was his rookie year, which like he wasn't Tristan Wirfs, right? But he was still pretty good. But he did get jacked up versus like Cleveland Farrell and stuff like that. So it's not like he was elite, but he was still solid enough where he'd be a big upgrade from last year. And that was Becton at 370. What about Becton at 350, motivated for a new contract? And like the whole thing about him playing left tackle or right tackle, I'm like 99% sure he's playing right tackle. I do not see him playing left tackle. And the chances of him in a contract year saying, pouting and saying I'm not going to play is I think it's non-existent. Like he has to play at this point. But he hasn't played a game really in 2 years. And even his first year, he started in 12, 13, but how many of those games did he come out of? 2 or 3 of those. The Colts game he came out. Like there were some games he came out. So if he's healthy, yeah, great. And now the depth from that point, I think Douglas has built some solid depth. I think people have a bad idea of like what good depth is if they're not like all pros. People are like, oh, they're terrible. It's like, oh, okay, sure. Now, is there maybe a different move or 2 that I would have done on the backup offensive line? Sure. Like, would I have brought Fant back over Billy Turner? Yeah, that's probably something I would have preferred. But Billy Turner also has guard flexibility that that George Fant doesn't have. So I think the starters are pretty volatile, but I don't think it could be as bad as last year. And then you have some solid depth. I'm comfortable with Mitchell. I'm comfortable with Turner if they have to come in. I'm not comfortable with Warren. I'm not comfortable with Kajust, but still 2 of the backup tackles I'm comfortable with. And in interior, we have great depth in the interior, right? Like you have McGovern, you have Tristan Colon, you have Wes Schweitzer. So it's pretty volatile, but I don't think it's ever going to be as bad as last year because you can't expect 7 injuries. And I think the depth is just a little bit better than last year, but you can't expect it to be tested like it was last year.
What do you make of Keith Carter as the offensive line coach and run game coordinator?
Yeah, so I actually just got sent a coaching clinic of his, so I want to watch and see exactly how he likes to teach his own scheme, because like outside zone in one scheme might be different than an outside zone in another scheme. Like Benton might have been much different than Keith Carter in terms of how they handle blocks and how long they stick on combos, or exactly how they like their footwork. You had Benton, who was big on like the third step. You should know what you're doing in zone, where some guys are a little bit more like straight line attacking. Some guys are a little bit more, give ground to gain ground. It all depends on the system. Like you look at Benton's system in terms of teaching his own concepts. And you look at guys like Scarnecchia was the big guy from the Pats. It's completely different. So I do want to look into a little bit more exactly how he teaches his system, but I know obviously it's zone based, and then they had more 12 and 21 personnel usage than I think we're used to seeing with the Jets last year. So I think that's a pretty interesting thing to see exactly how they're going to handle that this year, because obviously we know at this point, which is weird to say, our roster is pretty stacked. Like we have guys who are legitimately our 6th string guy who may have been a starter a couple of years ago. Like Brandon Eccles would be starting on many of our teams in years past, or whoever it may be. But with that being said, it's hard to kind of say that we could afford to bring on another fullback, because at that point you're carrying five running backs. You're going to have to carry 10, 11 offensive linemen, 10, 11 defensive linemen. So
maybe Rucker gets those reps.
To see. Yeah, that's what we're thinking. That's what I'm thinking is, okay, they're going to come into camp. They're going to see if one of Conklin, Uzama, Rucker could fill that role. If not, then it's a Baldwin thing, or is it a thing where they kind of abandon the fullback, because we've seen that. Like, we can't just assume that's going to happen. And I think last year we expected them to bring a fullback in, and then obviously Baldwin went down. They didn't really replace him. So I think it's more fullback usage, a little bit more heavy personnel. But in terms of the exact differences, I have to watch that. I have to watch that clinic.
Like they can always bring Lawrence Thomas back. Was that his name? The defensive lineman who they stuck back there.
Yeah. We were historic for putting guys out of their natural positions. Antonio Allen to corner didn't work out.
Sheldon Richardson worked out good as a running back. I mean, he was efficient. Didn't he have a touchdown on every attempt?
You are right.
Job done.
Yeah, I think he had about two or three touchdowns that year. Sheldon was pretty exciting. That was a little bit of a disappointing end with him, but.
You just mentioned Ruckert. I was curious what you think about him, because for me, and this might be a little bit bold, I'm not sure how many people agree, but I think he's going to overtake Uzama and be the tight end too by the end of the year, because I just don't like Uzama. I thought his blocking was really disappointing last year, and we know he typically doesn't do a lot as a receiver. He's a good yak guy when he does get the ball, but he doesn't run routes too well or have the best hands. So I'm not a huge fan of him, and I like the way Ruckert finished the year. He's a 3rd-round pick, so it's not like he's a cheap investment. I think they're going to want to get him out there. So where do you think he slides in this year? Do you think there's a chance that he overtakes Uzama at some point?
I think there should, I think that should be the case now. How strict is Douglas to hey, I paid this guy $7-8 million this year, or whatever it is. Can I allow a guy who's making $1 million overtake his role? You'd hope that the staff wouldn't care about that, and legitimately the best player plays. I think that's not always the case in the NFL, where some veterans or guys who are higher paid are going to be in that spot. But it's surprising with Ruckert last year, because we all watched him at Ohio State and we watched his film, and the thing was, okay, he's raw, he's going to have to develop. And then he's benched last year and developing, and people are losing their minds. It's we kind of knew this was going to happen. That was the story about him. He was almost going to be a redshirt year. He came in and he impressed, but it's kind of the same thing with Adams or Knight. It's okay, it's a very small sample size, so how much do you want to pour stock into that? Now, obviously, it's not a lot of stock, because they already have 2 guys above him, but I think there's a potential for it, because Uzama was a guy who, I don't want to speak for all JetX, but it seems like most of JetX was saying he was a little bit overpaid when he was signed, and maybe that was the part of We saw it on Take Flight, the documentary series. They really emphasize guys with character, guys who have won championships. So maybe that's why he was paid as much as he was, because it does not make any sense that he was given more money to Conklin, that in my mind. But the NFL and contracts is just weird how it works sometimes. You have Connor McGovern, who's a decent guard last year, making $1.2 million, and Wes Schweitzer, who's a backup guard, is making more money than him. It's just I have no idea how that exactly works. But with Rucker, I think he has a potential, because I think he has a higher athletic upside. You have Uzama, who's 29, 30, 31 years old, who's getting a little bit older. So I would love to see Rucker overtake Uzama, because I think Uzama is like a very average number 2, but I think Rucker could be a legitimate starting tight end. We knew he was going to be kind of redshirted, and he was, but he balled out when he got his limited opportunities. So I think there's at least a chance that he overtakes Uzama, and I would say it's greater than just like a 10, 20, 15, 10 to 20% chance. I think it can actually be like a 25 to 50% chance he actually overtakes him towards the end of the year.
Who do you think leads the team in slot reps? Michael and I were talking a lot about this, because we saw plenty of Lazard in the slot in Green Bay. Wilson obviously can dominate from the slot, but we saw him move outside, and he looked equally as effective, if not more. Maybe Corey Davis could get some of those slot reps. I mean, who do you see in 11 personnel sliding inside?
Yeah, I almost, and this is more of a feel thing than it's like a legitimate, like, okay, this is based on anything. I think it's going to be Lazard more than anybody, just because of his involvement in the run game, and also, not to speak down on him, it's all, and maybe more credit to the other guys, but I think Corey Davis and Garrett Wilson have more of an ability to win on the outside, where Lazard, he's not the most fleet of foot and doesn't have the best releases. So if you can kind of get him in tightened splits, bunch sets and in the slot, and have guys not be able to press him on the line of scrimmage, then I think he can get open more, because once he built up a little bit of momentum, he can box guys out over the middle and things like that. And they do like to run a lot of slot fades with him, like Hoss concepts and things like that. So you're going to see him on slot fades. You're going to see him in the slot involved in the blocking game. And then also, I think it kind of hides detriments to his game, where he's not the most athletic guy, where he'll have a lot more free releases. Now, I think it will be a pretty heavy dose of him and Garrett Wilson in the slot, with Corey Davis like mostly at Z and out wide. But also with this system, and in most like West Coast systems, especially the Titans splits, it's like, is there really much of a difference between like a Z and a slot? Like, they're all in bunch sets, and they're all not facing a lot of press coverage. So it's not like it's the biggest like stagnant offense where it matters like a lot, but it still matters somewhat. So I would say it's Lazard, because of hiding his deficiencies and getting him involved in the run game. And then, like I said, they do like to run a lot of slot fades, and maybe that changes throughout the year, where Lazard maybe doesn't live up to the price, or whatever it may be, or maybe it's a thing where Garrett Wilson starts to dominate, and Garrett Wilson starts to win on more on vertical balls, and then maybe he's used more there, because Garrett Wilson, like, he was great last year, but we didn't really see him used vertically a lot.
No.
And maybe that's where he takes his next step next year to be like a legit top 10 receiver. So maybe he overtakes that role, but at least at first, I think it's going to be Lazard. Do I necessarily agree with it? I'm not going to say that. It kind of depends on exactly how much 11 personnel they're using. I could say if Lazard is playing over Davis a large chunk of reps, I'm not going to be thrilled with that. But to start, I think it's going to be Lazard mostly in the slot, or getting the most slot reps. I think it's still going to be a pretty heavy rotation.
Yeah, I would love to see more vertical game from Garrett. I mean, it was hard to even give him those chances last year, because none of those 3 quarterbacks could complete a vertical pass. Think of that pass against the Vikings, when he actually did get open and White overthrew him. So it was hard for him to get that production. But Rodgers with Devontae Adams was hitting so many. Yeah, that was that was frustrating. But Rodgers with Devontae Adams was hitting so many go balls every single year. So I think we'll see more of that, and it would be exciting. But you're just talking about Lazard. I want to talk about another one of the new receivers that they brought in, Mecole Hardman. He's a guy who they've been talking up a little bit. I mean, Saleh was talking about expanding his role, giving him a more expanded route tree and things like that. So do you buy that? You think they'll actually do that? Does he have the potential to truly expand his role, or is he just what we expect him to be, just Berrios' replacement, but also bringing a new deep element in addition to that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I said it, like in a previous stream. He's like a souped up Braxton Berrios with more of a vertical game. His route running is just extremely raw. So I could see him maybe being like involved more in the offense. There's actually some times with the Chiefs, I wanted to see him more involved in end arounds and jet sweeps. Like I know he took some offense to being called like, oh, the jet sweep guy for the Jets, but I think that's okay. Like if that's your role in an offense, that's fine. I think he's a fine number 4, but if you're expecting anything more of him, that's on you. But it's not like he's coming from a bad system. Like a lot of people always thrive with the Jets, and we've all said this. It's like, yeah, he came from a Hall of Fame head coach and a Hall of Fame quarterback. Like, are we really going to like break him out? I'm not necessarily so sure about that. And then in terms of like the receiving or in terms of like the punt return game, like he's electric there. But then there's also reps of him. Like we have to be realistic about it, where I'm seeing him fair catch the ball at the 4-yard line with like nobody around him. And it's like, okay, that's kind of sketchy. That's exactly what we hated Braxton Berrios for last year. And like the new thing is always so much better. And I do like him much more than Braxton Berrios. And considering they got similar contracts, he adds a lot more to the offense because even if he's not the most well, and I'm not even gonna try to like to sugarcoat it like that. Like he's a pretty bad route runner. Let's just be transparent. His hands are pretty bad. There are some bad elements of his game, but he has the ability to take a jet sweep 75 yards because of his speed in the open field, and that's going to hopefully open up the offense a little bit more. And I hope they build off of that speed, because if you're going to involve him in jet sweeps and end arounds, it's going to choke up the defense a little bit, and then hopefully you hit a deep shot with Garrett Wilson behind it. And then also with him, like regardless of if he's not the best route runner or not, if almost like with Robbie Anderson, you had to respect the speed. So if you're going to put any type of like 2-level concept over the middle, like a crease concept, dagger, whatever it may be, their safeties are going to have to account for his speed, because he doesn't necessarily have to be the most precise guy. Like look at Robbie Anderson. He would run a terrible comeback route, but because the guy had to back out, he had to back up so far because of respecting Robbie Anderson's speed. Even though it took him 10 seconds to get out of his break, he was still open. And like Hardman's the same type of thing, where you're going to have to respect the speed, so he doesn't have to be the most precise route runner. But I think he's going to open up the offense in terms of like the end arounds, the jet sweeps, and then the vertical element. But if you're expecting him to be a 700-800 yard guy in a really primary part of the offense, I think you're mistaken.
Yeah, there's been a lot made about some free agents that are still available. DeAndre Hopkins, Dalvin Cook. Do you feel like the Jets should explore any of those? I've been very against the Jets bringing in Hopkins. It looks like that proved to be right. It doesn't seem like the Jets have any interest there, but the Dalvin Cook rumors are still there. Michael has come out against Dalvin Cook for a number of reasons. How do you feel about this? Do you think the Jets should go all in and chase one of these guys, or do you think that these guys are over the hill?
Can I be like in the middle and say kind of both?
No.
I get that Hopkins is overhyped, but do you have more faith in Hopkins and Corey Davis this year? Like I would say yes, and maybe you can't, Ben, but at least Hopkins, and I know he had the suspension and all that stuff, but he's at least been healthy. And I know that his last year, a lot of people are saying he didn't have the most diverse route tree, and he was force fed the ball. But I would still, if it's a similar price, I would take a Hopkins over a Davis, just because if Davis was consistently healthy, then maybe I would say, okay, Davis for his price. But if Hopkins is going to cost you $4 million more than Corey Davis, I would take that risk. That's the price of Ashton Davis and some other guy who's cut while cutting Corey Davis for a guy who, he might not be what he was, but I still think Hopkins is a pretty solid number 2 in the league. And to me, it's not like it's not a thing. Again, maybe they're overhyped, but for the Jets this year, is there a point of going like half in? And they're more than half in right now. Like, let's even say they're 80% in. But you're getting Rodgers. You're going for it all, right? Like let's not hold back, and let's try to add every single possible thing to this offense or defense to put us, to put us over the hill. So does Hopkins over Corey Davis great in your odds? To me, it does, but it depends on the price exactly. Now for Cook, it's an interesting one, because a lot of people will say add Cook, but who are you cutting? Are you cutting Michael Carter, who had a really good rookie year? Like, are you betting on Carter was year 1 or year 2? You have no idea. But if he is year 1 Michael Carter, that's a big loss if that's what he's going to be. In year 3, 4, 5. And then even with Knight, like Knight had a pretty impressive couple of games. And I know they weren't versus necessarily the best defensive lines in the league, but I was impressed. The film review came up a couple of days ago, like the full thing. And a lot of his 1 yard per carry later on in the year was the offensive line was brutal at the end of the year. Yeah. Brutal. Now I'm not going to say he has the best vision. He's the best guy in the world. He should be a number 1 somewhere else. But watching Knight last year, I thought he was a pretty solid depth guy. So, who are you getting rid of? And we've, Nani has broken down the numbers 1,000 different ways on Cook. The numbers are pretty pretty negative on what he did last year. And it seemed like he was a guy who just took what was available and didn't really do much past that. So are you going to pay him $5, $6, $7 million for that? I'm not necessarily sure. But I could also, and like the transparency, like I can go back and watch and be like, okay, I feel like the stats are misrepresenting what he is, because I don't always agree with the stats, and I think that's what's, not to blow up Nania's ass here, but I think that's what's good about Nania is like Nania will look at the stats, but then also recognize, okay, film is also a very big part of this. Like not every play statistically is created equal. Like okay, you throw a pick. Is a pick, or is it a pick like Sam Darnold throw and it bounced off Jerome Peake's chest into a Vikings defender? Is that the same thing as a pick?
Man, what a random reference.
Double coverage.
And I perfectly pictured that.
Yeah, I remembered
it
too.
Shows how insane we all are.
But how are the stats a little bit more negative than what Cook is? Because when I watched Cook, and obviously, like, listen, I'm like everybody else. You hear about Cook. I'm gonna Google 2022 highlights Cook and watch them. And to me, he seemed like he was pretty decisive. He looked like he still had some good speed to his legs, really, really quick cutter. So is there some potential that the stats are a little bit misleading for him? 100%. So I have to say there is a chance that I go back and I'm much more positive on him than numbers would indicate. But I think he's a little bit overhyped at this point, because like, what's the true difference between him and Kareem Hunt at this point? And I know he had, there's some stats that came out the other day about Kareem Hunt had like a lot of like under 1 yard rushes or 1 yard rushes. Like he was actually towards the top of the league. So I'm not sure if he dropped off last year or exactly what happened. But I think both of those names might be a little bit overhyped. I would say I would prefer Hopkins over Cook, because I'm not sure how much of a difference Cook actually makes, where Hopkins, just for consistency's sake, I still think he's not maybe a 1, but he could still be a legitimate number 2. And, however you feel like he was used with the Cardinals, are you really banking on Cliff Kingsbury being the smartest, offensive mind in the league and necessarily using Hopkins in the proper role? Like, even if Hopkins is dropped off, I'm still more faithful in him being a 2 than Lazard. So that's a move I would make. I would explore other options. I don't know who else would be out there. I've been pretty consistently Quan. Yeah. In terms of defense, Quan. But in terms of like offensive playmakers, I have no idea why the Bucs are hanging on to Mike Evans. Like, I don't understand what that relationship is. They're going to do absolutely nothing this year. He's 30 years old on a relatively big contract. Like, that's a move I would 100% explore making. But past that, like the realistic ones we've heard about, I'm more for Hopkins than Cook. But I could be down for either. So I'm kind of straddling the fence a little bit on both those guys. Either way, I'm happy.
Yeah, for me, I'm on board. I've been on board with the Hopkins idea at the right price.
Trader.
I mean, Ben and I have talked about it. No, listen, I'm not a trader. You and I have talked about how I think, the idea of seeing him as still a superstar is probably a little bit expecting too much, because, the age, the suspension, the injuries, there's a lot of stuff there. But, like you said, Joe, if it's at the right price, if it's a little bit more than like a Corey Davis, you're probably feeling better about Hopkins. And for an all-in type of year, I think it would be great to have the receiver depth, because it was a huge thing coming into the offseason where we wanted another guy next to Garrett Wilson, and they never really got him. And they made some good moves, but they're one Garrett Wilson injury away from basically being similar to the 2021 unit in terms of the structure, like Corey Davis, number 1, and then solid depth, but they don't have that 1-2 punch that a lot of great teams in the league have. So I think it would be cool to get Hopkins if it were a fair price, but it seems like a moot point anyway. It's not happening. But with Cook, I mean, you're totally right, Joe. Obviously, the film is the most important thing. Like, I could watch Cook, and I skimmed through a little bit, but I'm not going to act like I'm an expert on him or anything. Mm-hmm. And, it could be completely different than what the numbers say. But, that's always how I like to look at it, is as many advanced numbers as I can get in there. I feel like that contextualizes it better than, box score stats or Pro Bowls or any of that. And there's a lot of negative signs with all that stuff. And it's funny, like, I don't know if you guys have experienced this recently since we got Rodgers, but when you're out wearing Jets stuff, I get talked to about the Jets all the time now. And it never used to happen. So a couple of days ago, I was getting new shoes, and the guy started talking to me about the Jets. He's like, oh, the Patriots are going to get Dalvin Cook. They're going to be a threat in the division. And my dad was like, well, he's kind of taking a step back. And then the guy was like, oh, he had 1,200 yards last year. But
like,
when you're out in the street, you can't talk about EPA and DVOA. No. I can't really bring that up out in the world.
Yeah.
So that's my thing. There's, their offensive line was considered really good, and Cook was inefficient in a lot of the key running back categories in terms of creating his own stuff. So And then there's just the fumbles. He fumbles a lot, the pass blocking, the drops. Those are things that the running back can control. There isn't really that factor of, is it the O-line? Is it him? Those are things you can control. And when you're struggling in those areas, that concerns me, especially on a team like this. Like, I don't want the risk of fumbles. Okay, maybe he hits a home run here or there, which is great, but you don't want that untimely fumble or that poor pass protection or the timely drop, and he has a lot of those. So I'm pretty anti-Cook. I would rather roll with what the Jets have, but that's just me personally. But I want to talk more about some of the additions they made this offseason and what you've seen on film, because it's just, as we know, like we talk about all the time, it's such a different perspective than what people generally know. So between all the additions they made this offseason, whether it's free agents or draft, who do you think is the most misunderstood player among Jets fans? It could be overrated or underrated, but the player that Jets fans are kind of talking about the most incorrectly, let's say.
Yeah, and just really quickly on the whole like Hopkins thing too. It's just like the whole price thing. I get it. It's just like if Hopkins is on the Jets right now, and every single team, if they lost their one, it would screw them. But I would just feel so much more comfortable with the two. It's not even if Garrett Wilson goes down. It's like if Lazard or Davis goes down,
Right.
I'm not comfortable with Hardman being the three in an offense. That sure, that's good enough in years past for the Jets, but like we're legitimately trying to win the Super Bowl in the most stacked AFC I've seen in my entire life,
Mims,
like
baby.
by far. So of course,
Mims
of course.
is coming
so
in.
It's just like get me a guy who I'm more comfortable with, and I'm okay with Hopkins as a two. I would be thrilled with Hopkins as a two. Like, okay, there's maybe like T. Higgins, Devontae Smith. Like, there's some guys you take over him, but he's still a top 5, top 10 number 2 receiver. And I can't say that for Corey Davis or Lazard. So I would still do it where I'm not so sure that Cook is going to be better than a Knight or a Carter, whoever it may be. But in terms of the misunderstood guys, it's like fans are always going to be more positive on guys, so I feel like I'm always more towards the negative because fans are always going to be, oh, this guy is great. Lazard is so much better than Corey Davis. It's like, bro, look at Lazard's hands. Like, he has the worst hands I think I've ever seen. Like, terrible hands. I'm sorry, it is what it is.
Worse than Stephen Hill?
Maybe.
Really?
Yeah. Well, no,
Okay.
not no. That's
going to be the title of the episode.
That's a reach. That's a reach, but dude, like his hands are really, really bad. If you're frustrated with Corey Davis, you're gonna be a lot more frustrated with Lazard. So Lazard in terms of his hands, but I don't think that's really a misconception about his blocking. And his blocking is okay. It's good, but it's not great. He's not the best blocker in the league. Corey Davis is a better blocker than him. I think there's a misconception about every single player, to be completely transparent, because I don't think anybody knows. I don't think a lot of people know stuff like Carter Warren. Oh, he's pro ready in pass protection. Is he really? Are you sure? Because I didn't see that in pass protection.
I said that. I'm guilty.
Okay, so I'm sorry to blow up your spot. Like, he's not ready in pass protection. Like, yeah, the numbers and all that might look good in college, but there's some stuff that's not translatable to the NFL level. Like, there are plays that might look great. And it's like, yeah, but if this guy had like halfway decent technique, he's absolutely destroyed. And that's kind of what I saw a lot with Jermaine Johnson last year. It's like, yeah, this rep worked versus a college from Miami of Ohio, but it's not going to work versus Morgan Moses in week 1. So, but like misunderstood. To go positive, I think Cobb gets a lot of hate for being wide receiver 5. It's a guy I actually like as wide receiver 5. I'm taking him over Denzel Mims or Jeff Smith really any day of the week. I think there's misconceptions about how good Amos, which I hate that his name is said like that, but it is what it is. Amos, how good he was in 2020 and 2021 versus 2022. Like, he's always been a little bit overrated by fans, but I was very, very high on Clark. And of course, like 2 days after I said Clark was the best move of the offseason, he gets injured. Like, it's just absolutely terrible. But like, realistically, I'm kind of just throwing out random stuff because I think there are misconceptions about every single player on the Jets. Like, that's how I feel. I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, getting into the analytics, like, I feel like there's no player who's really like truly understood. But yeah, some of the biggest ones, I would say Cobb is a little bit underrated. Lazard overrated. Amos overrated. I think there's some maybe like Zach Kuntz is overrated. I'm not going to say the whole.
All right, here we go. How about this?
So let's just positives.
Who's the most overrated and who's the most underrated out of the whole team, not just additions?
Oh, who's the most underrated Jet on the entire team?
MC2 maybe. MC2's.
You can't say Thomas Hennessy. The long snapper's a cop
Honestly,
out.
like for going into this year, and McGovern creeps into my head, but I just think he's average.
Yeah, okay.
I think a lot of people. I'm not gonna go there. I think one of the more underrated Jets this year going into the year is probably Conklin. I think you look at what Conklin was in Minnesota, and I'm not exactly sure if it's the exact stat, but he had like 4 drops in 4 years. And then he comes to the Jets in his first game. He has like 2 drops and a fumble. And people are like, he has terrible hands. He can't catch the ball. It's like, yeah, but the prior 4 years, he dropped the ball like once a year. So are his hands really as bad as they were in 2023 or in 2022? And he had 500-600 yards, and obviously stats aren't everything. But he was 9th or 10th in tight end receiving yards, and that's with a combination of Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, Mike White throwing him the ball. So I think he could be a guy this year who's creeping up to 700-800 yards, going to be 5th, 6th, 7th in tight end receiving, and I think he'd be a lot more efficient. And to me, and this is something I didn't really see a lot with the Jets last year. And again, I've watched thousands of reps of multiple teams, so sometimes I can be a little bit forgetful. But I didn't see the tight end as a primary read on a concept a lot. And I think with Conklin, if you can isolate him versus some linebackers in the league, or actually quite a few linebackers in the league, he can win one-on-one reps. Yeah. And I'm hoping that's something that he can do. With the Jets, like he's not a Rob Gronkowski go win vertical balls, but if it's a man coverage rep and you're going to ask him to have an option route in or out on a linebacker, I'm going to be pretty faithful in him winning. So I'm going to say Conklin's the most underrated at this point. The most overrated is
there's you guys I'm thinking of.
Again, yeah, there's a lot of guys who
there's one guy I'm afraid you might say might ruffle some
his agent might email us.
Him, but also another guy.
Okay. So for overrated in terms of, I don't know who you guys are talking to, agents. Maybe Mosley. Mosley's a guy who's overrated at this point. Why? You guys, is that a guy? Okay.
No.
So maybe not Mosley. So no, Mosley's actually really good.
No, you give the honest take.
No, it's Mosley's good. Like it's just last year you saw him lose a step, and I still think he's mentally there. But there were also some mental lapses he had last year, like the jumping offside in the Buffalo's game was obviously a huge problem.
Do you think he was in on that Detroit touchdown? Was that him?
No, I think watching that back, I remember thinking that was Quincy. But I can't 100% guarantee that. But I remember thinking that was a Quincy play. Whitehead, I would say, is another overrated guy. But with Mosley, there were a few more mental lapses, like jumping offside on 4th and 1 or 3rd and 1. I think it was 4th and 1, right? Yeah. There's a play. Was it? I don't know if it was the Bears game or the Browns game. I forget exactly what game it was, but there was a play where instead of wrapping a guy up, he tries to punch a ball out, misses the ball, and it allows a touchdown. It's like that's not something you see from Mosley a lot. So I'm not saying Mosley's a bad linebacker or anything like that. I still think he's solid, but in terms of him being like an all-pro top 5 guy now, I don't think
highest paid player on the team.
I don't think he's that. Whitehead was a guy who was overrated last year, and Nania knows, and whoever else watches the film, he was like, people know, like the thing you heard about Whitehead was what last year, Nania, like, oh, he's a great tackler, doesn't miss tackles. Yeah. The first game I watched, go back and watch 2021 Bucs opening week against the Falcons and tell me how he's a great tackler, because it's the first game I was like, dude, no, like, absolutely not. He's not a good tackler. So
they confuse the hard hits on the highlights with being a good tackler.
Calvin Pryor's a good tackler.
Ignores the consistency of it. Yeah. Fantastic.
Exactly. So yeah, there's definitely a few guys, and you could really get to a lot of overrated stuff, and because Jets fans are going to tend to overrate their guys, and a lot of the years past, like, we've been a team who's been 4-12 and a really bad team, so a lot of guys are going to get overrated in general, and maybe this is a year where now we're underrating guys, but Mosley, there's quite a few. The one I thought you guys were afraid of me saying was, and this is one I really don't want to say. I don't want to say it because I still think he's very, very, very good. Was Sauce's rookie year a little bit overrated? I'm sorry. Was it a little bit overrated? Maybe. And that's not me saying that he's not a top 5 corner. I think he's a top 5 corner. Let me just squash it right there.
All right.
He is still very, very good. Was he so elite in his first year where he's locked down, guaranteed number 1 or 2 guy for the rest of his career? I don't think he was that. I thought he was very, very impressive. But there were plays where he was the benefactor of circumstances. If you go back, even just watch the highlights, The play where he gets that pass deflection on Lazard, it was not a good play by him. It was good catch-up speed. It was not a good play by him. The play where he gets the pick versus the Dolphins with JFM hitting the court or hitting Skylar Thompson, that was not a good play by Sauce. Good athleticism to break on the ball, but the process was not good how he got there. So there were some plays where he got away with it. Then again, I'm not saying he's not a top 5 guy. I'm talking about top 5 versus lockdown, surefire, number 1 guy in the league for the next couple of years. There were some flaws there.
But the makeup speed is still part of his profile, though. Like in the length, like his ability to make up for some mistakes is part of why he's so good. I think the thing that people get on him about, especially opposing fans, is the perceived defensive pass interferences. Did you see that, or do you think he's playing within the rules?
It showed up sometimes, like there might have been a call or two, but then there was a call or two where there was an OPI where where they didn't get called. Like the game against the Broncos where Cortland Sutton grabbed his arm and he was complaining about that. Like there are plays. There's a play against the Broncos where Jerry Jeudy pushes off late, and nearly catches the ball out of bounds. But then there was plays like I talk about with Lazard with the pick versus Skylar Thompson. Yeah, again, great athleticism, but can you bank as a corner? Okay, in that play, I think he opened up early. He attacked his blind spot. He broke outside, and Sauce was late to see the break. He broke on the ball, and he was hit, and Skylar Thompson was hit, so he was able to get back to the ball. But if the ball is out on time, and it's a halfway decent quarterback, it's a completion for a first down all day. You see that, and again,
that's his biggest. That's one of his worst plays. He's a damn good player. Like
Deontay Johnson, he beat him for a touchdown that game. He didn't get both feet in bounds. So there were some plays there that. I'm not saying he's not elite. He's elite, but is he the most elite? Like that's where I just think he has to pump the brakes a little bit. He has to build on it. And I just did a review of him with Marcus Coleman about a week or two ago, whatever it is, that will get posted. And we talk about some of the areas he can improve. And if he can improve in a few areas, you're talking about like legit number 1 for I'm not saying like a legit number 1. Like I'm talking about like the best in the league for a couple of years because he has the athleticism, he has the want to. But there are a few things he needs to work on in terms of tracking vertical balls. I think he's a little bit better at that. There are some times I want to see him change his technique, like shuffle versus staying heads up and weaving. There's some times he lets guys get into his blind spot at times. So there's little things he could do, keeping his feet under his frame, where I think he could take that next step. So I'm not saying, again, reiterating, he's not elite.
I'm going to clip it
but the number 1 guy, surefire in the league, pump the brakes. And this is something that I never really thought I would necessarily say, but and again, it's all kind of like about circumstance because there's so many good receivers in the league that Garrett Wilson has to fight through, the Tyreek Hills, the Stephon Diggs, all these guys who are legit in the league where there's not a lot of good corners. So I think Sauce is a better corner than Garrett Wilson is a receiver. But I was just as impressed with Garrett Wilson in terms of just their level of play. Like I think Garrett Wilson might have actually been better, but because there's a lack of good corners, Sauce was like raised up to the top of the league where there wasn't as many good receivers in the league. Garrett Wilson would be considered one of the best, but you have Tyreek Hill, you have Diggs, you have all these guys where you don't really have a star-studded cast of corners in the league right now.
Is there a single corner you take over Sauce?
Yeah, so that's something too. Like when I talk about like top 5 and all that stuff, it's more of like a generalized statement than saying, okay, yeah, I went and watched Darius Slay's entire season, and I watched Patrick Surtain's entire season. So it's more of a general statement than it is, okay, I like this guy more. The only guy who like right now I think you consider taking over Sauce for the long haul is Surtain, and that's about it. Because all the other guys are a little bit older. Like you have Slay is a little bit older. You have however you feel about Ramsey or whatever. I think really the only conversation would be about Surtain, but I'll take what we have in Sauce because I think Surtain may be, and this is just based on like passive watching. I think Surtain is a little bit more technically refined than Sauce, but Sauce has a higher athletic upside than Sauce. It might be a thing where Surtain is just like 10% better with his athleticism or with his technique, but if Sauce can fix his technique, then he's gonna be the better guy because Surtain doesn't have his length and his size and his speed and all that stuff. So I'm still taking Sauce as the number 1 in the league right now, like fantasy draft with corners. He's still my guy. But I'm just saying that I think his season may be a little bit overrated, while maybe Garrett Wilson's was a little bit underrated. Like I put out a clip the other day of Garrett Wilson versus the Ravens. Like he cooked Humphrey that game like 5 or 6 times, and he just was not targeted. So in terms of underrated, overrated, like some guys like that, and I know people are going to like hate me for the Sauce stuff, but I'm just going to be obviously transparent with what I see on film. So
I think that's the thing about the cornerbacks is what you mentioned. There's just not enough competition there to where it is easy for a rookie to come right in and make that case. versus receiver. There are so many established stars that, even a guy looks as good as Garrett Wilson did, and he still has a ways to go to prove that he's up there. And it's also just so hard to quantify cornerbacks. Like, everyone can see receiving yards, receptions, touchdowns, all that stuff. And, there are stats out there for cornerbacks. And, obviously I'm someone who posts them a lot and looks at them. And statistically speaking, Sauce was number one, but it's just, you always have to verify that. And without watching every single guy in depth, that corner is a position where you really have to watch to contextualize more than most other positions, I think, because any stat that is attributed to you doesn't necessarily mean you were what the stat says, because like you said, that Deontay Johnson play against the Steelers, that should be a touchdown, but it goes down as an incompletion. And the interception was, great play, but there are other circumstances that made it happen. So there's a lot of context involved. So I think you're right in the sense that, Sauce still has a ways to go to prove that he's the way that he can consistently be the player he was this year. But at the same time, just cornerback is so lacking in consistent stars who are great every single year, to where I think the door was open for him to be the clear-cut number one, even as a rookie. But we just have to see it, year.
The other thing too is, Joe, do you feel comfortable saying he had the best season ever for a rookie corner? Because rookie corners don't often come in and play like he did.
Yeah, and again, it's not a thing where I'm not, again, he was elite. It's just there are plays that were out there where if it went a different way, you're talking about him giving up another 2 or 3 touchdowns, and it's still being a very, very elite year, probably one of the better seasons we've ever seen from rookie corner. I just think people talk about Sauce like saying he's absent of flaws, which I think is a reach. And
that's fair.
I can go back and watch Surtain and say, okay, he missed plays where he could have had given up a touchdown as well. But so it's not really me speaking and saying that guys are better than him, but I'm just saying in terms of there was some flaws there. And like I said before, it's something where Sauce is elevated up to number one because there's not as much competition, where there's a lot of elite receivers out there. But Garrett Wilson was just as impressive in his rookie year, but he's in a position where he's dependent upon quarterback play, where Sauce is obviously not. So.
How do you think that's sort of happened, this difference between how receivers have so many superstars, there's just an established list at the top, here are the 10 to 15 elite guys, and then corner is like this fluctuating position. There are guys who are, your Ramseys, Howards, all these guys who will have a great year or two and they'll put themselves on the map, and then they just get legacy Pro Bowls after that because we just assume that they're superstars, but they're actually not playing like that anymore. So why do you think it's like that? Receivers, we know who's good. Corners, it's like back and forth. There isn't really that established group of superstars anymore, like you may have had in the past when it was Revis, Woodson, all these guys.
Yeah, so one, I think it's the fact that college is like a lot more pass happy now. So you have receivers who are developing a lot in college, and then really it's just receivers, and obviously it's a difficult position to play, but it's a lot harder to play corner with the rules now in the league than it is to play receiver. And with the rules, it's also a thing where you have a lot of schemes. Like, how many scheme touches do some guys get? Like, even Devontae Adams in a few years with Rodgers, like how many balls did he get behind the line of scrimmage? Like, is that Devontae, or is that scheming of the offense? I'm not now saying Devontae Adams is overrated as well. I'm just saying that you could scheme touches open, you could scheme guys open, where corner, legitimately, they're running to a spot where you don't know and they know. Like, it's a hard spot to be in, and you can't touch them now, past 5 yards, and you can't really do much unless you're Sauce, apparently. And that's just the New York thing. Sauce is only good because he's in New York, and Woolen's obviously much better, which is a crazy argument as well.
The Jets haven't had a single roughing the passer penalty in like a decade.
Yeah, that's bad. The Jets have, and like even the Garrett Wilson play against what game was it? The Bills game where he had the bounds late.
Yeah.
So it's
and
crazy,
and
hopefully that stuff starts to change. Pats too.
On the end around,
they scooped them up.
They
scooped them up.
15.
I think was that the one he referenced? He said that a ref told him it ain't no state anymore.
Yeah,
I think that's the Bills. I think that was the Bills game, but I remember that in the Ben is talking about with that end around, it was to the left, and he like kind of turns it up on the hash, and then he gets lifted up.
Yeah.
But I think it's a thing really about receivers are used a lot more heavily at the college level, so they're more developed coming into the league. And then just the rules and the scheming of offenses now, it's a lot harder to hold your spot as a corner, where receiver, it's a little bit easier transition into the league. Now, obviously, with that being said, it's a very difficult spot as well. But Corner's just it's a really hard spot to play. And again, I think we have the top 3 guy. He's done absent of flaws.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about Sauce. We've talked a good bit about Garrett. The guy who gets kind of flies under the radar, maybe for good reason, but Jermaine Johnson. You mentioned him a little bit earlier. What did you make of his rookie year? Some flashes, but also didn't see the field as much. Was out for some time as well. Deep defensive line. And what do you kind of make of his projection into this next year? Do you think he's ready to carry more of a load?
It's a really interesting question, because while he may be ready to carry a bigger load, is he going to? No, right? Because then why did you draft McDonald? Why do you have Huff? Why do you have Carl Lawson? I think he's going to be used in a similar role he was last year, just because at what point does he see the field over JFM on an edge rush opportunity, or Lawson or Huff or McDonald? So he's pretty far down in the pecking order of pass rushers, and specifically they didn't draft McDonald to stuff the run. They didn't re-sign Huff or tender him to stuff the run. So I don't know how many opportunities he really has to show true progression. But I was impressed. I was impressed with the rookie year. He got 3 or 4 sacks. He had a good one on Josh Allen. I think his run defending held up. He was very good at Florida State, but you can't just automatically assume he's going to be good at the NFL level, and he was that. I don't think he's ever going to be a 10 sack type of guy consistently. I think he's going to be a guy who can get you, maybe 6, 7, 8 and be a really good run defender, which is still a really good starter. Everyone doesn't have to be TJ Watt. Now, obviously you prefer that, but if your first round pick's going to be a very solid, DN, because he's very good in the run game and just an okay pass rusher, I think that's okay. But I think Johnson has the ability to be a decent sack guy, but I don't think he has the athletic upside of guys like Will McDonald. He's a little bit more tighter. He doesn't have the best bend, but he has good strength. He has good length. He has good burst. So there are some tools that he has to be a good pass rusher. I just don't think he'll ever be a guy who's racking up, 10, 12 sacks in a year. I think it's more 5, 6, 7, being a really good run defender. And then again, past that, it's like this year, could he be a better edge rusher? Sure. But how many opportunities is he legitimately going to get? Because you already saw him last year with 30-ish%, right, Nania? Something like that. And
yeah.
Okay. So even less than that. And you had Huff at 20%. I think it was actually 17, which is a crazy number. Now, hey, you only added
34 for Johnson.
Oh, my bad.
Okay, 34. So yeah, I thought it was around 30, and then Huff was around 20. But now you're adding Will McDonald to it. So even if Jermaine Johnson takes a leap, how much is it really?
Now, do you buy into the idea that maybe JFM plays inside a little bit more? It sounds like Clemens is going to play inside a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I hope that happens, because I think JFM, his best role is an interior rusher. He's good. He's good on the edge, but his quickness and his length inside help him versus he's. Based on how he is as an athlete, I think he takes advantage of guards better than he takes advantage of tackles, because, while he has some good athletic upside, you need good bend there, and he doesn't have the best bend. He's 290 pounds. It's hard. So he can bull rush through a guy's face at times, but he's just farther away from the quarterback, and I think he's meant to be closer to the quarterback. But then with that, okay, he moves inside more, but still you have Lawson, you have Huff, you have McDonald who are going to play over him on the edge, in my opinion. And then with that being said, you move JFM inside, but then where's Quentin Jefferson playing? Because Quentin Jefferson had really good numbers in terms of rushing the quarterback when he was on the field, and he's going to be that primary third down rusher. So, is your best lineup with JFM on the outside or on the inside? I would probably say on the inside, him and Q on the inside with, Lawson and one of Huff or McDonald on the outside there. But even if JFM kicks more, somewhat more inside, does that lead to Johnson getting up to 50% of the reps or anything like that? I don't think so. Considering JFM played there were some games he played 50% last year. Yeah. So I still think JJ is floating around 40% of the reps. And he's not going to have a very large opportunity to rush the passer, which is unfortunate. Well, it's unfortunate for him, but it's great for us. We have such a depth on the defensive line. It's truly great to watch, but some guys may be pigeonholed a little bit. Can Huff defend the run? I don't think it was so bad in the past where I watched him oh my God, there's absolutely no chance of him doing it, but he's never going to get the opportunity to do so with the Jets. So then is he here next year? Because
you could be traded at the deadline.
Hey, exactly. We'll give you $5 million a year to rush the passer. And that's the only thing you're going to do, where you might have the Bucs calling and saying, hey, we'll give you $8 million because we'll play you versus the run. We could take a shot on that athletic upside and hope you could do that, where the Jets can't necessarily do that. So it's going to be really interesting, but I don't think JJ gets the opportunity. Yeah, I could see it happening. I don't think he's back, but I think at the end of the day, JJ is going to play around the same percent of the reps he did last year and have a similar year. But you hope he just upticks his productivity
Yeah.
in those
Look, I
reps.
mean, if Huff is unbelievable, they'll definitely find a way to bring him back. But I think he is who he is. I mean, we'll see. He might make another jump this year. But I am interested to see how they use these guys situationally. I mean, obviously in passing situations, I wonder if we're going to get the Huff and McDonald on the field at the same time type of reps. But if they stick to kind of how they did it last year, again, like third down might be different. But last year they kind of had their two different units. They had their starters, then they had the B team where Nathan Shepard and Solomon Thomas would come in. How do you kind of see those? What's the A team and what's the B team on first and second down? Because I imagine third down is just going to be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I know that's something that at least Nani and I agree with. I don't get to speak to you as much, Ben, but it's something where if the Jets don't change their rotations and how they did it last year, we have serious problem at coach.
Right.
I can't see the whole hockey substitution thing anymore. It's ridiculous that you have situations where it's like 3rd and 1, you have Nathan Shepard and Solomon Thomas on the field because of rep percentages and all this stuff. It's like it's a little bit crazy. So they have to do more 1-for-1 substitutions. But first down's tough. Like I really don't know if it's going to be Quentin Jefferson or Woods there on first down. But let's say it's all about situationally too. Like I don't think they're going to rotate their defensive line like they did last year because they can't, because they have guys who are so polar opposite, whether it be JJ from a McDonald or a Huff, or from a Woods to a Quentin Jefferson on the inside. Like you have to be much more specific to run or pass. But so I don't want to say like first, second, and third down, just because again it's really dependent on the situational or how is it 3rd and 1, is it 3rd and 6? So to me it's like more okay, the run stuffing group. You have Q, you have Woods on the inside. I would say JFM on the outside, and JJ is probably your best run stuffing group. And then pass rushing, I'm hoping for Q and JFM on the inside, or Q, and it depends on JFM's going to play the outside, but Q and Jefferson / JFM next to them. And then and then on the outside, it being Lawson. Lawson's getting paid, $10 million to rush the passer. Like that's what he's doing. So he's going to be one of them. Now, with that being said, I do think there's going to be some sets where they're both, you have both Huff and McDonald as 9 techs, and you're really isolating the inside 3. On like putting them on an island with stunts and twists and things like that from the inside guys. But for the rushers, I would say on the outside it's Lawson and one of Huff and or McDonald. But yeah, they cannot do the same thing they did last year with the rotations. It just did not make sense. And even even receivers, sometimes they did it. Like there was plays last year where it was Barrios and Mims and like Jeff Smith on the field, and it's like, why is Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, and Corey Davis on the sideline when it's 3rd and 5 in the red zone? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, Ulbrich was saying because his defensive line gassed in the Super Bowl. I saw that quote earlier, and he just believes in really being rigid with those snap percentages. But I agree, it doesn't really make.
But at what point? And it's great to have depth, but at what point are you investing so much capital into a limited round of reps? Like, and listen, I like McDonald more than I did at the pick, so I'm not even going to get into him versus another guy. But is it the smartest thing to pour a first round pick into a guy who's going to play 20% of your reps in a Super Bowl or bust the year? Like, I'm not saying it's a bad pick or anything like that, but just in terms of the value invested into very limited snaps, JFM's getting paid $13-14 million a year last year, and there was a game he played 49% of the reps or 50% of the reps, which is not enough for a guy making that much. Quentin Williams does make $25 million a year. There's games he was playing 60% of the reps. I get a heavy rotation or wanting to get your guys more rested, but I still think your best players need to play more at that point. Like get JFM up to 65, get Q up to 75, not 90, but 75. So. At what point are they pouring too much capital into guys who are not on the field, where you don't really have like a true starting free safety? You don't have a true third linebacker who's proven. And in years past, where it's like, hey, we have Tony Adams, we have or Jamie and Sherwood, great. We can see what they are in a year where we're 4-13. But do you trust Tony Adams at this point to say, okay, hey, listen, you're going to have to go against Lamar Jackson's, Joe Burrows, Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs? Like, are you that faithful? I'm not. So it's interesting.
By the way, when you mentioned what you said about the receivers and having some of those, backup teams on the field, the Vikings game came to mind. So I looked back at it, and there was a play on 2nd and 5 in the 3rd quarter in the red zone where they 12 personnel with Barrios and Mims on the field. So I don't know what they were cooking with that at times, but yeah, I agree with you on the defensive line. I think the hockey substitutions was already a bad thing, when it was, when it was the team they had last year. And now that they have all these specific skill sets on the D line, like, you don't want Woods rushing the passer too much. You don't want Jefferson against the run too much. Although he could be better defending the run in this scheme, as you broke down in your film review. Maybe he's not disastrous, but it's still not ideal. So with all those skill sets, I agree with you that it needs to be more situational, and that's going to be key. But one of the guys you mentioned who I think we're all hoping can have a bounce back year is Carl Lawson. And that's not even to say he was bad last year, but he definitely wasn't the caliber that we thought they were getting. But that's understandable, obviously, considering, he was coming off the Achilles injury. Then he had the second surgery that we didn't know about, which means he was, only even closer to the end of his recovery by the time the season started. But he played all 17 games. He was solid, but we know he's capable of more. So do you think that there's a chance he has that sort of bounce back season? And from watching him last year, what do you think was the biggest difference between the 2020 season we saw from him?
Yeah. To me last year, and again, it's hard to quantify. I watch like thousands of reps of guys. To me, he relied on like his power too much last year. Where
that's what I thought.
In years past, he's like, it's not like he was a finesse player, but he used some more finesse.
Like he had that spin. He had the inside spin. There was some outside stuff as well.
He would spin, and exactly with the outside stuff. Like he was big on like speed to power and sometimes faking speed to power to get back to speed to the outside, and he didn't really use that. Where at times last year, it felt like instead of using his technique, which is pretty solid, he just rushes, duck his head and just rush into guys, which can get you pressures and things like that, but not necessarily the sacks. And I don't like he's never been the biggest sack guy, but when you go back and watch him with the Bengals, like what was it, 2019 was the year we watched prior to him coming to the Jets? 2020. You watch it and like none of the rushes around him are creating any pressure. So anytime he even broke free, the quarterback can just roll out opposite of him or step up in the pocket. And like, so he created a lot of pressure numbers, but it's also because he didn't have Quinnen Williams pushing the pocket and pushing the quarterback back into him. So I think I think that's a little bit of an overstated thing with him is like he can't finish sacks. Like I think a big part of that was what was around him in Cincy, while acknowledging at the same time he's not the best sack finisher because he has short arms and he doesn't have the biggest tackle radius, but he's still not a bad guy in terms of finishing sacks. It's just kind of what was around him. And then last year, that's going to add to the stats because he couldn't really break free of guys because he was just bull rushing, and it's harder to obviously break free of a bull rush unless you just completely demolish them. So for him, I think he'll definitely have a bounce back year. And like you said, it's not like a huge bounce back because he still had what, 7-ish sacks, 6-7 sacks. 7. So he was still decent, but you hear everybody say it, and I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but I'll trust them. It's like, that first year back after the Achilles, it's you're not, or ACL, Achilles, same thing, or not the same thing, but same type of like injuries, tears. You're not the same guy year one, and then you hear obviously he had a setback really late into the offseason, so he's going to be even farther away than he should have been from being what he truly is. So I think he'll definitely have a bounce back, and I think he'll be worth the contract. Where like this year we're talking about him being cut for the $15 million or whatever. I know he restructured it down to like 12. I think it's like 9.3 with incentives or something like that. But he took like a $3 million pay cut. So I think he'll definitely be worth the price, and I think we'll see a better Carl Lawson in 2023 for sure.
All right, just a few more for you. You mentioned McDonald. I love when I see trench guys who have any sort of background in martial arts, whether it's wrestling or jiu-jitsu, or it's just because it feels like the trenches is a martial art in its own right. What do you make of McDonald, and how do you kind of see him fitting in this year? Is he just Huff 2.0, or do you think he has a bigger role?
It's Huff 2.0. I think he has the ability to play the run, but it's almost like JJ. Like, why are we going to ask him to do that at this point? Like, in what instance is he better than Clemens, JJ, Lawson, whoever else on the edge there? I don't see it happening. So I think he's more in like a specialized role. But I'm definitely higher on the pick. And this year, like, and transparently, like we have years past where we started JetX, and it's like I did 20 prospect reviews before the draft happened. But this year I was like, are we even gonna have a first round pick? So why am I gonna watch all these guys? We trade our first round pick, and I just did hours and hours, hundreds of hours of work for absolutely no reason. So I stayed away from the draft. So my natural reaction was having some drinks with my buddies, having more than some. I'm like watching, like, who is, like, what? I'm like, I saw this guy in like late first round, second round stuff, but we know what it is. And I fell into the same trap because I was being a casual fan. Like, we know people value guys where they do because of mock drafts.
Yep.
It's like, oh my God, this guy in a mock draft, I saw him on drafttech.com in the 4th round. He's in the 7th round. Now he's a great guy. It's like, okay, and Draft Tech knows what. Like,
Yeah,
we
who
see
wrote
guys
that again?
who slip all the time. Exactly. Like some guy with like 3 followers from wherever, from like India or something. It's like, okay, like this is the guy you're
Shout out
depending on
PFF.
your football, like, so yeah, that's what it is. And actually, Nania, I was going to bring this up when you're talking about some of the corner stuff. I saw something the other day that, like, in terms of PFF, they, for their coverage grades, like anybody who's not targeted just gets like a neutral grade. So you can't get a bad play on a play where you're not targeted. It's like, I've seen some really bad reps of guys when they're not targeted. Like, we're not going to count that.
We
now.
only
It's
use
like,
PFF
okay.
if it makes if it
supports our
yeah,
narrative.
exactly.
Yeah.
It supports our narrative.
But
Yeah,
I have noticed that, I think I think for receivers too, they only grade targeted plays. So like if you run a great route and you didn't get targeted, you're not getting credit for it, or vice
and Nania,
versa.
you know that's like at least 50% of my reviews is plays that guys aren't targeted, whether it be corners, receivers, tight ends. Like, that's obviously a big part of the game as well. But in terms of McDonald, so I wasn't like super high on it at first, and obviously like having a big contingent of your value or of your capital getting poured into the defensive line is a little bit of a question for me. But in terms of the player, I'm higher on him than I was JJ last year. Like, I think he has a much more high athletic upside. He has everything. Like, he has the length, he has the burst, he has the bend, he has the strength. It's there. Now, obviously, it's going to be a little bit underrated because playing 4I at 242 at Iowa is not going to be conducive to you showing off your strength, like taking on down blocks and tackles, or taking on guards. So I think he's stronger than people realize he is, and I think he's only going to add weight, but he has elite athletic upside in terms of the length, the bend, and stuff like that. And he has some technique. There's some things he needs to work on. Obviously, there's nobody coming from college who did not have things to work on. So I think he's going to be a guy who doesn't see a lot of reps this year, but in future years, I think he could develop into a full-time player. And you can never say, like, you can never predict a guy to be a guy who's going to get 15, 16 sacks in a year. But is that his athletic upside? Yeah. For sure. Like, he has the upside of elite guys in the league. It's just about how much he's developed and how much he takes to coaching, which it seems like he does. And I know he's a little bit of an older guy. He's 23 years old.
Hey.
But he started playing football. Dude, listen, I'm 30. I'm 30. My hair is receding a little bit, and I'm getting some grays. Like, it happens. It happens to all of us. Like, I remember being like 18. Like, oh, now I'm at the age where guys are drafted. It's like, oh, now I'm a veteran. I'm not a rookie anymore. Then it's like, oh, now like, I was 28. I'm like, oh, well, now I'm at the age where, like, off or running backs are too old. Now it's like, okay, well, old, I still have the prime of like a linebacker, so I'm reaching a little bit.
We're reaching old draft prospect age now at 23.
Yeah, I'm like, Tom Brady played until he's 44. He played in the NFL. He's an elite athlete. I'm just the guy from Middletown, New Jersey. Like, it's fine. I don't have to be an elite athlete. But so for McDonald, he has the upside. I'm really high on the player, the character, and all of that. He has the necessary tangibles to be that guy. I just don't think he's going to be asked to be that this year.
All right, moving back. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, you and I are at the age where if we got drafted in the NFL this year, we would be like average age. I think 22 is like that.
23.
23 is. I'm 22 right now. I think were you 23 by the draft?
Yeah, on the draft,
right?
Day one.
Yeah. So you would be old. I would still be young because I have a few months on you. If we were in the NBA, though, I mean, we would be senior citizens if we were getting drafted.
Yeah, so that was the point. I don't know if I brought up the point about that, because people say he's like a 23 older prospect, but he's been playing football for 4 years, for 5 years. Like, that's not a lot of time. So he's still pretty. And it's not even that his technique shows it, but he still has a lot of room to grow, because like he's already so far along playing football for only 4 or 5 years. I'm excited to see where he is 6, 7, 8 years with NFL coaches coaching him up, and a scheme that's going to aid him, because Iowa State was like big on spilling runs and forcing things to the sideline and allowing their safeties and their corners to make tackles. But you have a guy who's 242 taking on blocks from guards and things like that, where if you put him on the edge and you ask him to use his length and his power to set an edge, versus like a kick out block, I think he could do better in that role. So he was miscast, hasn't been playing football for a while. I think he's a really high upside.
Yeah, I'm really high on him. I'm I think if he's any good, I'm definitely gonna get his jersey. I don't know about the 99. Seems like he should be a single digit guy. But there aren't too many.
Slender.
There aren't too many guys who look like him when you turn on the film, and I think that's the thing that I felt about previous Jets teams. Is it's like you watch other NFL games and you see some of these athletic freaks on other teams. You're just like, why are there no guys? Like, looks like they're playing a completely different sport. McDonald seems like that type of guy that a year from now, 2 years from now, when he really fills out and fully develops, you're going to be happy about that pick, even if it's like, okay, well, they have a surplus of defensive linemen. Where are the reps going to come year one? I think I was like you when I first got picked. I was like, wait, that guy? Like we were looking at him maybe for second round, but then you go and watch him, and it's just like, okay, I can see why his draft stock maybe wasn't as high because they were playing him out of position. But you look at the physical traits, and there was still production. I think he's a guy that we're going to be very happy about moving on. I think if we move one level back in the defense, there are some more questions. Defensive line, we're feeling great about. Linebacker, you already talked about Mosley a little bit. Michael was not too high on Quincy. I don't know where you were on Quincy 2 years ago. He's come around on him a little bit. Quincy had a better year last year, but still obviously some missed tackles, some missed gaps in the run game. And then we'll see what they do with Quan. I'm getting to the point where at this point I think I'd bring him back. Just because all it takes is one Mosley injury away from your two starting linebackers being Sherwood and Quincy. And even then, if you're going in your base package, if you're in that 4-3, I kind of felt like Clark was going to play a lot of those linebacker reps. But
1,000%.
you've lost that. So now it's like, all right, Sherwood's going to have to play a significant role. With or without Quan, you're going to see Sherwood out there. So what do you make of Sherwood and Quincy? Are they on the underrated, overrated list? Or are you worried about Sherwood? We've seen him in limited reps, and he's had some okay plays, but not really enough to feel confident about as your number 3 or even your number 2 linebacker.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like, if we were in a year where we weren't necessarily like going for it all, then okay, run it out, see what happens. Like, you like the fact that he seems like a smart guy and all that. I think his athletics upside's a little bit limited, like where he's never going to be elite, but he could just be all right, which is fine. Like, we can just have all right players. Quincy is so hit or miss. It's either a really good play or a really bad play. Like, that's what it is. And there's plays where he was covered up. There was a play where I think Sheldon Rankins got a sack in the Pats game. And if you watch Quincy, he completely blew his assignment. Like, he wasn't within 5 yards of his guy who could have walked in for a touchdown. So he's frustrating, and to me, probably a little bit overrated. To be transparent, like you look at linebacker contracts in the league, he got $6 million. Or around $6 million, and yet like Eric Kendricks got like $6.5-7 million. I know he's not what he was a few years ago, but I think he was a little bit overpaid. But for continuity's sake, I'm okay with it. You just hope he's a little bit more consistent on a down to down basis.
I like to pay.
And then, and then with the Quan thing, like there's multiple layers to it, because it's not only protecting you at linebacker to me, because okay, if you have a Mosley injury, if you have a Quincy injury, okay, he steps in. I think Amos is brought in to fill that Clark role. I don't think that he's going to do as good of a job as Clark, but I do think he's going to be in the box and like that hybrid linebacker.
More so than Whitehead?
Yeah, more. Well, I think with Clark, it was like locked down that he was going to be in that linebacker role. But with him and Whitehead, I said this on the stream last week, I could see it being a situation where whoever the better of the two is and whoever produces more, they kind of split those box roles. And then when they go into either heavier personnel or heavier personnel where there's not they go to lighter personnel where there's not, those two safeties on the field, or those two heavier safeties on the field, then maybe Amos or Whitehead's the only strong safety in the field, but it kind of depends. But yeah, for me, Amos he's definitely a little bit overrated by fans, but I was more comfortable with him in the box. So I don't think he's going to be that free safety for the Jets where when he was brought in, people are like, oh, that's what our starting free safety is. It's not Tony Adams. To me, they try to rebound from the Clark injury, and that's the role they're going to use him in. Now, maybe it was Clark linebacker, Whitehead strong safety, where now it's going to be a little bit more flexible with both those guys, at like strong safety versus linebacker, and obviously it's a pretty similar role. But if you bring in Quan, it protects you in two ways, because if you have an injury at linebacker, he comes in at linebacker, great. Or if you have Tony Adams, who's going to be playing free safety at this point, if he's struggling, you have Quan fill Amos's role in the box, and now you have Amos go to free safety because he's played there, right? So like it protects you from two spots. Like, and obviously it's not. Trust me, his 2020. Like, this is where you talk about like PFF. Like, he had an 86 overall grade or whatever it is, which is very high. So I went back and watched it, and I asked Nani to like send me some games that were good and some bad. And like I would ask him about, oh, this was rated a good game. I watch him like really?
Right.
Like, that was a
Yeah.
good game. So he's definitely overrated by fans. But like for Quan, if you can bring him back for $2 million to be insurance for multiple spots, like why not do it? And you heard about how much he was liked in the locker room and how highly Salah speaks of him. Like why not just do it? Now, does he want a bigger role? Because last year he played 40% of the reps with the Jets, and maybe he's hoping for more money. And even if it's not more money, does he hope for a bigger role to hopefully get another payday, next year? So, to me, I would definitely do it, and I'm not so confident in what we have in between the linebacker and safety spots, but Quan would be a good move to have some insurance at those spots. But I think they could be okay there. Better than last year, but that's still not ideal having Amos or Tony Adams versus Patrick Mahomes in the conference championship game.
Yeah, who do you see matching up with the tight ends? Because I think when they're playing the Chiefs and it's Travis Kelce, I think you're probably putting Sauce inside on like the high end tight ends. I don't know how you feel about that, but if they're going man coverage and you're facing, I don't know, Evan Ingram, somebody who's not one of those top end that you want to slide Sauce in, who's doing that? Is it Tony Adams,
like Darren Waller?
Yeah, somebody like that. Who do you see matching up with the tight ends?
So the thing I think in terms of the safeties, like who's the best at man coverage, it's Tony Adams. The thing with Tony Adams is he's a little bit smaller, so can he match up versus bigger tight ends, consistently? I haven't really seen him have to do that, so I can't say confidently he could do that. So I think Tony Adams is probably your best option for matching up with tight ends, and obviously dependent on the look, because if he's matching up with tight ends in the box, do you have Whitehead roaming the deep, like middle of the field and cover one? Because that's a shitty spot too. So maybe you want Tony Adams to be playing deep and you'll take the hit of Whitehead versus those guys. But to me, it's Adams is the best option there. I just think he may be playing more deep than in man coverage roles like that in the box. So if you're going to go to another guy, I would probably say it's Amos.
Do you want another option
over? What are you going to say? Are you going to say a linebacker?
Bryce Hall.
Yeah, and like that's, and like I would be like okay with that because he is bigger. To me, I don't know if he makes the roster.
I know he's definitely on the chop. We were talking about maybe Bernard Converse, like one of those bigger DBs they have in that specific situation. If you're going man coverage and it's not one of the high end guys that you want to put Sauce on, it's like, all right, maybe a Hall or we'll see what Bernard Converse looks like. Because otherwise, I don't think they have the size or that was really Clark. That was one of the reasons I was so high on Clark was I just felt like, okay, finally we have a guy who can match up with these tight ends and he can play in the box. He's just such a great. When that trade happened, I know you're super high on it as well, but I just felt so good about that move. And then it's like already the football gods are cursing us.
I don't gas up a lot of players. I gassed him up. Like I really, really, really like.
I texted Michael day after the trade. I was like, I think this is going to be one of Joe Douglas's best trades.
Yeah, he loved that trade.
It was the best move of the offseason. Yeah. It legitimately was. 7th round pick, $4.5 million, whatever it was. Oh. It was very legit. He's just so solid. Like he's the master of none, but so solid. Everything. His eyes are so solid. He's very solid in coverage. Now, if you're asking to play, I'm talking about like short range coverage. If you're asking to get deep and play like like half the field in cover two, okay, a little bit sketchy. But in the box, he was just so damn consistent. So that definitely does hurt. But the thing with Hall is like it's so funny with him, and this is kind of just like speaks to the volatility of Jets fans. Like at one point he was so overrated, maybe, and now he's so underrated. Yeah. Because he got beat up versus Kyle Pitts in the preseason. Now we hate him.
Yeah, maybe
because he gave
maybe he shouldn't be matching up against tight ends.
or because he gave up like a perfect coverage touchdown to Devin Duvernay. Like now we hate him. Like that was a really good play by him. It's just sometimes a really good ball and a really good catch beat good coverage. Like it's not like he got burned for 10 yards in that play. Like he was an inch away from making a play on that ball. So I can see that happening in like a type of like hybrid role to bring him in, like to specifically match up with some guys. It's just, does he make the roster? Because at this point, I think it's probably him versus Guidry for like that 6th corner spot. And they obviously brought back Guidry for a reason. So they view him as the backup slot, where Eccles is a guy who's going to be like a primary outside guy now, because Eccles was, I'm not sure how much he actually played in the slot last year, but at least based on the roster construction, I was thinking that he was going to be the backup slot and outside guy.
And do they see Bernard Converse as a safety or a corner?
I think he's a safety.
So, okay, well, maybe Tony Adams got some competition then.
Yeah, no, I realistically, I think he's competing for the 4th safety spot, and like a hybrid guy too. Like that could be the thing too. Like, well, hey, we have like a hybrid safety who's not fast enough to play in the slot, but he could play an outside in a pinch. So we want Guidry for that backup slot, but we can afford to get rid of Hall now because of JBC being able to play safety and outside. But for me, JBC, he just doesn't have the necessary athleticism to play consistently outside at the NFL level. So I think he will be the safety for the Jets, and I think he's fighting for with guys like Ashton Davis for that fourth safety spot. But I could see him being used. That's kind of like a wild card in terms of it's not Hall. I could see it being Adams one. I'd probably say Amos is the second best of that, and then JBC because he has the athleticism to be able to do it, and he has the size because he's bigger, right? Like 6'1", 205 or something like that.
They really like the length on defense, which I think is a smart approach. Take up more space.
Yeah, for sure. And it's different with Reed, but with Sauce and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a good idea to have some length in there, especially when you're going to play like off and things like that, and be able to make plays on the ball. But I think it could be JBC. I think that's an underrated look at it. And again, maybe it could be Hall. At this point, you're paying him $2 million. Could you trade him for a 5th round pick? Listen, like if you could trade Cashman for a 6th or whatever it was, you could trade Bryce Hall for a 5th round
Jordan
pick
Willis.
So. Yeah, Jordan Willis for what we traded Jordan Willis and a 6th for a 7th. And a 7th for a 6th. Jordan Willis and a 7th for a 6th.
And that turned into was that who did he turn into? It was last year's 6?
I don't honestly. I
have to look back on that. We can remember the Sharon Peak interception, but not that.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see exactly what happens.
I think they traded it for James Robinson, didn't they? I could be wrong on that. Let me double check on this. Michael, go ahead.
That might have been the case. And James Robinson, that was an interesting one too. Yeah. Like he was just, I don't think they anticipated his knee being as bad as it was. And you see the Pats sign him, and then he comes in for a couple of months. Like, yeah, we're gonna get rid of you too. So it's so crazy how quickly you could fall off at the NFL level. It's like because like you'd assume like, oh, they're still a really good athlete, but they're all such elite athletes that the littlest tweak can bring you from being a good athlete to a bad athlete at the NFL level. So you drop off the littlest bit. Like we could talk shit about like, okay. I think Richard Sherman just had a quote the other day about saying like he couldn't keep up with Devontae Smith. He's like, I need to get this. I need to be done with this. Richard Sherman's still an elite athlete. It's just when you get a slight tick down versus elite athletes, it really shows. And that's what seemed to happen with James Robinson this year. Maybe that's what happened with Michael Carter as well, by the way. So.
Also, I found who they got with the Jordan Willis pick. It was Shaq Lawson.
Oh,
so I think that's a good trade. They turned Jordan Willis into Shaq Lawson, and he didn't have a great year, but better than Jordan Willis.
What happened with that? What happened with Michael Carter last year? Do you think, Joe?
Yeah, that's the one that's like really, I think the most difficult question. And again, like I've already thought about, like I've been done for doing film reviews for a week now. It's like starting to creep into my head. Like I got to do Sherwood, I got to do Max Mitchell, I got to do all these guys. I'm not going to do it. But Carter, to me, based on what I was watching, again, passively, like the first couple of weeks, at least, I definitely at least the first Ravens game, regardless of what his stats were, he looked like the same guy to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if he got injured at some point in the year and just lost it, because it wasn't a thing where like he was making bad reads or anything like that. He just simply wasn't breaking tackles. Like his first year, that's all we said about him. Is like, oh, first guy never brings him down. And regardless of what the stats were last year, he just did not break as many tackles. So how do you quantify, like, what is it about him breaking tackles? It could be situationally. It could be, okay, he created some more space for himself on other runs because he had better vision. And you're talking about breaking an arm tackle versus like a full body tackle. So like, there's some things we can get into with that. But in general, he just did not break as many tackles as he did last year. So I think it was either that 2022 was a mirage, and that's not what he usually is, or he was injured last year and he just couldn't be the same guy. He's such a wild card this year.
I have a random question because I think we're going to start to wrap up. This has been a classic Cool Your Jets long episode.
I was thinking I was going to go over an hour, and then we were having such a good convo. I was like, let's go 90 minutes. Why not?
I mean,
I'm cool with whatever.
Yeah, Joe Blewett does 3-hour YouTube streams. So he's
that's what I was going to say. We go long, you go long. That's what we do. We go into detail. Exactly. But this is a pretty random question, not film related, but it just kind of creeped into my mind because Ben and I were talking about. Oh, it's actually not. It's actually not uniforms. I know, it's a shock. But you and I were talking about tickets to the Bills game before this, so it creeped into my mind. Joe, you go to a lot of Jets games, the majority of them. What are your thoughts on MetLife Stadium? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I think it's the bad, the ugly, and the more bad. Like it's. I've been to a lot of stadiums. Like I travel quite a bit to stadiums. It's my goal to see all 30 stadiums in the NFL, and I've probably been to I think like 10 or so. So I'm like a third of the way through. It's legitimately the worst stadium experience that I've ever been a part of. It's just like it's in the middle of nowhere. The parking is terrible. They don't have enough security to get into. Like they'll bitch about us not being in our seats, but then also you're in a 30-minute line to get into the stadium. So it's like, okay, we'll figure out your shit there. So it looks ugly. The parking's bad. The security is bad. Now I get they kind of have to be like neutral, and it's only nice at nighttime where they could put like the green, LED strips and make it look all pretty. Like, so it's good. It's a good night stadium. But I'm not a big fan. It doesn't hold sound in well. It feels like when you're in the upper deck, like you're very far away from the field, where some other places it feels like you're really on top of it. And it felt like that in Giants Stadium, like you're much more on top of it. And that stadium held in sound more.
Yeah, but it was called Giant Stadium, and people bitched about that. Everybody forgets that part.
But I still rather have it be Giant Stadium and it create a lot more sound, because like you hear about how loud Seattle is. Like imagine how loud New York would be if we had metal bleachers and we had a concave roof that forced sound back into the field.
Instead of a vent.
Yeah, like you're loud, but you're also cheating. So like it's kind of bullshit. Like the whole Seattle thing. Like I think they're a little bit overrated, but I think our stadium.
Have you been to? I went to Seattle. It was pretty freaking loud.
I didn't do, again, metal bleachers. Yeah. Metal bleachers can be loud at a high school game with 1,000 people in the crowd. So,
but they don't sit on third down though.
Oh no, trust me. I've been there for 10 years. There's been times where a guy he's at his first NFL game and it's 3rd and 5 of the game tied in the 4th quarter and saying, "Hey sir, can you sit down? I can't see." No, you stand up. Like I am not fucking sitting down. Like it's not happening. So. I've been to Arizona, Indy, Nashville, Carolina, all these stadiums. I could say MetLife is easily the worst, which is unfortunate. But it is what it is. I love going to games and all that stuff, so I'm never going to stop going, but I hope they upgrade it eventually. Now the whole like move to New York thing, I would absolutely hate that, just because it's so much more difficult to travel to New York. Like, yeah, great. It's closer to some people. Have fun getting there and back. Like that's going to be an absolute shit show. Where right now it only takes me like 40. Well, they already built another stadium next to their old stadium, so maybe they just build another stadium next to this one. Like I don't know, but it's just
that seems like that'll go over well with the taxpayers.
It's just like it's 45 minutes for me, so it's like feasible to do it. But now if I have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning to get to New York instead of waking up at 6 to get the Jets games, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But yeah, it's a shitty stadium, and I want to see them upgrade it, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. But for now, I know you guys are big uniform guys. Like, let's not worry about the stadium. Let's just see the uniforms.
You think they're bringing back a retro this year?
I think they're doing a retro, and I also want to see them change some stuff. So, like I think Nania. I brought up the Nania, but like I don't like the fact that the shoulder stripes like go in like those like little wingtips, like that they're horizontal, and the ones in the pants are vertical. Like it just doesn't match up very well. And then I think there's one uniform. Well, no, I think it's like actually one specific. It's the white and the black, because the white goes across and the black goes down. They're like different color strips, whatever it is. But the uniforms are pretty ugly too, so I want them to change them. But we'll see.
No, it's the green it's the green on the white.
The green on the
white strips on the jersey and the green strips on the pants. Those are the ones that.
Yeah, it just doesn't match up well. So we'll see if they change them. But yeah, in terms of the stadium, it's bad, and I know I'm going to be even more down on it this year because my two stadiums I'm going to are Dallas and Vegas.
Oh, hey, I'll be at the
Dallas is great. I went to Dallas in 2015.
Michael, you're going to Vegas.
Oh, hell of a game.
Yeah.
Oh, hell of a game, right? That was a Kellen Moore game. Oh, yeah. It's like 17-16, like so that was the week right
before. So JetX is doing Vegas together, is what I'm hearing.
Oh, you guys
I think
are doing
so.
Vegas?
Yeah, I'm doing Vegas. Okay. Ben, you're going, right? Yep. So we're taking Vegas. Dallas is week 2, and I'm doing Vegas. I was supposed to go to Puerto Rico with my friend, but some things happened, so I couldn't go. So now I owe him a Vegas trip. So we'll be in Vegas, and after seeing Vegas and Dallas, I'm sure I'll hate MetLife even more. It really is a terrible stadium experience, and the fact that it's all of that on top of a beer costs you $13, like it's just ridiculous. What did you think of the crowd last year? Ben, do you remember I was like ranting about the fans during the Dolphins game? I was like, this is the fans' fault. They're not making enough noise. That's why the defense is slowing down.
You should upload. Michael records like himself during every game, and so he had the audio recording going during that game. You should just upload that 3 hours, because at one point I snap at him because he just keeps bitching to me, and I'm just like, shut up, please. But he was right. The fans were being pretty shitty that game, at least the start of it.
I really understand it from both aspects. So like I'm one of those guys who goes to the game, but I also can't complain to people who don't go because of how shitty the stadium experience is, how bad the parking is, how bad the product is. Like, yes, do I want to see people be there for their team? Sure, but have the Jets at the same point put out enough for fans to be there. Like, no, like they've
Right.
been bad. So why would you want to be there? My problem is when I go to games and there's people coming in like 2 hours late, or there's people who are sitting on their phones, or I'm in watching the game, or for the people who tell me to sit down on third down, like automatically it just stuff starts turning my head like, okay, I probably have to fight this guy. Like it just gets ridiculous at MetLife Stadium. There's a lot of aggressive people there and stuff like that. But if you're a Jets fan, it's not so bad. But yeah, to me, the fans, they're definitely not great. Like that, they're not what they were. But the Jets are also screwing.
Yeah, we'll
up
see this year
too, right? Like they did PSL, they did the PSLs, which screwed a lot of fans. They also do the stuff where like, they can't even figure out how to do the Jets chant. Like you have Fireman Ed trying.
Oh, that was something I was ranting about.
Yeah,
remember that they were like showing it all these different things going on. It's totally out of sync.
He's trying to hype up the fans, and then it's cutting to like a guy dancing with his kid, and it's like, no, give me Fireman Ed.
And they try to use the three of them because I think they don't want it to just be Fireman Ed.
Yeah, they feel like three different guys at all.
But then they're also playing music, so like you can't. So then it's not so quiet. So like it's
they need to make it a bigger deal.
Yes, yeah. It's them with that. It's the PSLs. It's the actual stadium experience. So like, yes, I want to say, okay, we should all be there. But with that being said, they don't really give fans a reason to be there. So I straddle the fence on it. It's just if you're going to be there, make noise. Don't be looking at your phones and tweeting and all this stuff and checking your fantasy teams. Like be into the game. Like every single game, I come, my voice is gone. Hands hurt.
Did you hear the Batman pod?
Clapping.
You hear the Batman pod last year? I gave it my all.
I'm pretty sure I did.
I said 14 words the entire podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I lose my voice too. It's just like an intro. It's like I'm gonna lose my voice intro this year as soon as Aaron Rodgers.
Oh my god.
2023 starting quarterback, number 8, and runs out the American flag. Like I'm gonna lose it too. And I'm hoping the fans come back this year and are more loud. It's just like
I think they will.
It really is like not to get into like the whole like social media thing, like where we're at. Like I'm 30 now. I'm sounding like an old guy, but it's just like the era we're in. It's just like it's hard to hold people's attention.
Yeah.
They're in that 10 second, 20 seconds. They're going to look at their phone. They're going to miss the next play. So going to stadiums like Buffalo, where they were what, like 7-8 at that point, or 6-9, wherever they were at that
2015
game,
one.
2015. Oh. They didn't sit down the entire game, and part of that was the fact that the bleachers were covered in snow, so you didn't want to sit down.
The bleachers are freezing cold; their ass is going to stick to it.
But still, like I love those same experiences where like and like even Lambeau, like everybody's standing the entire time. So I would like to see that for Jets games, but maybe they have to give us the other fans a reason to do it. But yeah, it's a pretty shitty experience, to be honest. So
all right, I think we can wrap there. Joe, you gave us so much great stuff. As I said, you really are one of the best Jets minds out there. So I would imagine anybody listening to this is following you on Twitter, but if not, make sure to check you out at JoeRB31. If there's anything else you'd like to plug, obviously you do your own show. You're on the Jets X Factor YouTube. I'll give you the mic for a little bit, but.
Jets X Factor. Obviously, Blewett Splits on YouTube. It's definitely more of like a niche thing where I really get into like the nitty gritty of the film and the technique and stuff, which some people don't like. Some people like the highlights and just going through it quick. But if you really want to get like technical deep dives into footwork and in steps and all the stupid crap I talk about, then go on to Jets X Factor and the YouTube, JoeRB31 on Twitter. I'm missing a few. Nania has like 31,000 over there. I'm sitting at like 9. So maybe there's some people who aren't listening to me that listen to Nania. So it is what it is. Hopefully I can get 1 or 2. But I definitely appreciate you guys inviting me.
Well, you've personally made me a much smarter fan, because I remember I DM'd you a few years ago and I asked like if you had any books and stuff to read about X's and O's, and you gave me one. But then you just basically said just watch the film reviews, and I've done that, and I have to say you've made me a smarter fan. I know you've made a lot of people. A lot of Jets fans much. I feel like as a fan base, we've become a little bit more educated. Maybe that's just the bubble that I'm in around Jet X, but this seems some nice, nuanced, reasoned takes on Jets Twitter recently. I'm sure it'll all go to shit week 1, but
it's because everybody left for Threads.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. All right,
which we still have to figure out if we're doing.
I'm not
know about the whole Threads.
I'm not getting off. I'm not.
I'm trying. You can't quote stuff. I can't. Like I'm a film guy.
I'm not gonna spend the time posting on both Twitter and Threads.
Yeah, and you can't post stuff from your desktop, so I can't upload a film play. I have to then grab it on my phone, do it. It's a worse product.
Objectively worse. People just want to hop on with a new thing as usual.
They'll come back to
but at the same time, I'm not like I haven't got rate limited in the last couple of days. I don't know if you guys have, but
I only had that.
I think
once.
I think it was a temporary thing because I read that it was because when they were building threads, they were scraping the data or whatever it's called. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I just know the first day I got rate limited like 30 seconds into it. I'm like, okay, this sucks. So I haven't got rate limited since then. So
you didn't get a blue check? Yeah. Cool Your Jets has the blue check. You can write that off.
I don't know how to get a blue check. How do you even get a blue check?
You gotta subscribe.
How do you even get a blue check?
You gotta subscribe to Twitter Blue, yeah.
Then
then you write it off on your taxes.
I'm not. No, I pretty much with Twitter, like in my earlier days of tweeting where I was like, 21, 22 and whatever, or even at games having a few like, drinks to get some beer muscles, like I would tweet back at people. But I think that both Nani and I do a good job of just like muting people and not really
I've been off
back
the
to stuff
for a
because
while.
it's just you don't get much nuance and the chance of you changing somebody's opinions is just not worth it. Like, you'll change 1 out of 100 opinions, so I'm not going to sit there and tweet back at you for an hour to change 1 out of 100. It's just not worth it. So I pretty much just post and dump on Twitter at this point. So it's still valuable, but I don't interact. I think some people are like, oh, you're a dick, you don't answer back to people, but it's like, no, it's just, what's the point? Like, listen to me on a podcast, I could talk about stuff a lot quicker. To have this entire conversation on text, it would have took us how many hours to talk about all the stuff we talk about. Like, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. So exactly. So I appreciate you guys bringing me on that for sure.
All right, well, this was really fun. Definitely want to do this again soon. Had a great time. You can follow us at TYJ Pod on Twitter, Michael _Nania, myself, Ben W. Blessington. We'll see about threads. Go to jetsxfactor.com, best place for Jets content. Make sure to check out Blewett's Blitz and at JoeRB31 on Twitter. Rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe to the Jets X Factor YouTube. I think that's it. Everybody have a great week. Go Jets.